Good evening. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Janna Lopez, and I had the great fortune of editing and co-creating Sweet Dreams Storycatcher, a most beautiful commemorative collection of Brian Doyle's Portland magazine essays on behalf of the University of Portland. While I consider most of the work I do a love for the labor, this book was no doubt 100% a labor of love. Each and every detail of this collection was crafted with Brian and his family in mind. And perhaps the greatest gift of Sweet Dreams Storycatcher arrived when we shared the book's intricate details with Mary, Brian's wife, one cold, drippy April day while sitting at their dining room table sipping tea. Before taking you to that profound moment, I'll share with you all that led up to it, give you insight into the intricate details, everything that went into creating the book, why I made certain editorial choices, and definitely an emotional struggle over getting it right. Then a couple of cool things are going to happen. I'm going to raffle a copy of Sweet Dreams Storycatcher, so hold on to your ticket. And then we're going to get to hear several selected excerpts chosen by a few honored readers. I'd like to thank a few special guests for being here tonight. First, Mary and his daughter, Brian's daughter, Lily. The book is truly complete for me now because you're here to share it with me. And I'd like to introduce and thank the new Portland Magazine editor, Jessica Murphy-Moo. Thank you so much for being here. Sometimes when I flip through the pages of Sweet Dreams Storycatcher, I see lovely finished pages and I'm removed from the fact that I had created them. I can recall every laboring detail between myself and the designer, Karen Gibson, that led up to each and every page. Yet, I think for most artists, there's a feeling of disassociation when you're inside a work and outside of a work at the same time. As creator, I came up with the overall book concept, the title, curated the essay collection, devised the narrative structure to evoke emotional flow, and helped imagine the beautiful visuals to bring Brian's words to new life. With this particular book, there was always some imaginary bubble hanging around. There was a weight and a pressure and an expectation to get it right because of what I inferred it meant. And to me, it was like the last hurrah of Brian's words when he could no longer utter them for himself. I was weighted by who this was for. It was for Brian and for his family and for the University of Portland and his colleagues, his friends, a globe full of adoring fans. Yeah, no pressure in that whatsoever. I'd never met Brian in person, although we talked on the phone a few occasions over the years. I contemplated sharing that one of those occasions wasn't as engaged as you might say. I probably caught him in an off moment or something when he was busy because I'd asked him a question and I think he barely grasped what it was that I was asking him, and he sort of laughed and in response told me to go buy his book, leaping. And he said I'd find the answer in the book, and I sort of laughed when we hung up. But in the throes of this book's process, he and I spent a great deal of time together. I mean, I pretty much spoke to him every day. I'd never met his family either, but as I read each essay over and over and saw something new and different because he was a word wizard like that, I felt very much that I was an intimate part of their lives. I wanted his family to be proud of Sweet Dreams Storycatcher, and I wanted them to really feel him and his presence, the husband and the father that they had lost, and to be a warm quilt of comfort for them if they missed him. We all remember that Brian Doyle was a beloved writer of books, articles, and editor of the esteemed Portland Magazine for 20 years. He had an incredible fan base around the world. November 2016, roughly a week after Brian turned 60, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. After surgery and treatment, sadly, he passed away the following May. I can say that the grief was sharp, and it was steep, and it was wide. Within the University of Portland community, many of his colleagues had worked beside him for decades. There was no doubt about Brian's impact upon the place that had become his work home and the award-winning magazine his essence had shaped in every way. With the void at the helm of the magazine, University of Portland wanted to find a meaningful way to honor him. And they wanted to address this transitional phase of his absence and bridge the future iteration of whatever the magazine would become someday. They brilliantly chose to do a commemorative collection of the magazine's essays as a gift for family, the University of Portland trustees, donors, staff, and Portland Magazine subscribers. Jody Hoganson from the University of Portland's marketing department at that time was familiar with my extensive publication and editorial work. I spent a decade as the publisher, editor, and owner of Portland Family Magazine. Churning out a publication month after month for 10 years, my skill set was highly developed in nuts and bolts project management, constructing flow of content, and enlisting creativity to bring a narrative vision to life. I sold Portland Family in 2014. Boy, I'm just getting ahead of myself there. Since then, in addition to writing my own book, I now craft specialty publications for anyone who needs one, and that includes every logistical, graphic, and editorial detail. Jody had seen a recent publication I had created for the University of Washington's executive MBA program. She was impressed with its uniqueness and then recommended me to the University of Portland. And I can't thank her enough for all that confidence that she thought I could be the one to do this job. October, less than 6 months after Brian had passed away, I met with Rachel Berry, University of Portland's marketing director, and we had talked about their goals for creating a commemorative collection. Keep in mind that many of Brian's colleagues were still in grief. I knew there were a lot of eyeballs on me coming in as an outsider. And they all had raw hearts when it came to the topic of commemorating him. Trust me when I say I was also well aware there was probably a long line of people from the academic and literary communities that would have loved to curate a final collection of Brian's work. No pressure at all. Logistically, the University of Portland was in a vulnerable position. They needed someone with editorial and project management experience to get the project swiftly completed. From the beginning and throughout the book project, I was impressed with the University of Portland. They had vision and genuine desire to honor Brian in a unique way, and they gave me plenty of room, trust, and confidence to come up with the best creative outcome I could imagine. I'm sure all that trust made a difference. I'm blessed to have a talented designer, Karen Gibson, and for the past 20 years we've collaborated on projects. She and I balance each other's ideas in some very cool ways, and especially when it comes to intertwining words with images, which was the main goal. I wanted this collection to visually shine as much as I wanted the work to show through. Mid-November, once we got the project's official green light, I was given a stack of Xeroxed papers. There was over 100 of them, and they derived from 20 years of Brian's essays. No rhyme or reason to the pile, just 20 years of photocopied words. When I left there, I looked at the pile and I thought, oh shit, what am I gonna do with this? It was overwhelming. The pile was heavy in my hand. I felt the weight of the expectation and the honor that I was going to be able to create and craft and come up with something that was new and imaginative for Brian. The staff was given to me right before the holidays, and I was keenly aware of Mary and Brian's children. I thought about them every day. It was around his birthday, the first anniversary of his cancer diagnosis, and I knew they'd be celebrating the first holiday season without him. I placed the pile on my desk, and for the next week, I just looked at it. I didn't do anything, I just looked at it, it sat there, I knew that it was there, and we reached a common understanding that I knew that it knew, and I sat there with the pile, and I just let it percolate. The truth was, I'd never had a project that was so personal, and that was so important, and that was so forever. There was something very forever about this project. So in moments of doubt, I was quite intimidated, and I thought, what can I bring to something that's already so great, and how am I going to make it better? As the pile simmered, I contemplated, and I looked over and I asked it, what is the intention of this going to be? What is it going to mean? Why is this collection being created? Conceptually, then, the intention started to crystallize. I knew I wanted to craft a timeless keepsake that served as a gift to Brian to say thank you for your words and your contributions. And at the same time, I wanted it to be a gift from Brian to the world of his words and contributions. A next step to frame forward motion of the array and ideas that were swirling in my head was to crown the impending collection through a title. This would set the collection precedence. I knew the title needed breathing room, open for contemplation, and one that was really resonant of Brian's very particular writing style. How will the collection title honor him? What will the title convey about the body of work? What does the title share about what a reader can even expect from the content? Titles are an interesting thing as a writer. They can just appear and help with the flowing of the words and give you some sort of direction, or they can be like petulant, naughty, hungry little children that no matter how much you beg them, they will hang out and wait, and you will just sit there and have to suffer until they decide they're coming with you. And sometimes titles are just little gifts that appear and feel graciously given and are totally right, and that is the way it was in this case of this book. Sweet Dreams had several simultaneous meanings to me. Brian had said that writing in itself was like an expression of dreams. He once shared, "I love writing novels. Novels are like long dreams." Sweet Dreams is meant to infer the sweetness, as in the touching and meaningful morsels of his writings, each sweet essay as a dream. Sweet Dreams to me also said goodnight instead of goodbye, as not a final departure from Brian with his passing, because through this book and through this collection we're merely saying goodnight. And I actually pictured like tucking in a child in bed. He referred to himself as a story catcher. He once stated, "There's a story in everything, in every being, and every moment. Were we alert to catch it? Were we ready with our tender nets? To catch and share stories, what could be holier and cooler than that?" The book, therefore, as a collection, are Brian's caught stories. The cover image was selected maybe six weeks into the process. After discussing it at length with Karen about what the cover image should be and say, we combed through dozens and dozens of photos. We came across the image and we both knew that that was it. It was Mount Hood, a place Brian had written about and referred to in his writing and appreciated. And the photo's ethereal nightscape was really perfect for what I wanted to convey with the Sweet Dreams essence. Now, for the pile and the curation of essays. Who was Brian Doyle? The work as a body had to be representative of who he was in his life. Generally speaking, he was a man who cared about education and learning, a man of faith, someone who was inspired by nature, a philosophical man, a story catcher, a friend, a family man, a father, a man who contemplated life and death, and someone who considered his place in the world. I vetted the content based on these conceptual facets that would best depict who he was in his life. I narrowed down the pile to 56 essays from the original over 100. It was tough to pull back the lens and evaluate how each essay was going to fit into this whole narrative arc, but I knew I wanted the work to feel alive. I wanted it to be new again for those who knew Brian, and for those who didn't know Brian to feel like they got to know him just by reading the book. Chapter titles were specifically crafted to be resonant of his writing style, while at the same time create a cohesive narrative theme. For example, Stunning and Lovely, which depicted Brian as a man of faith. Of Wind and Cedar, which highlighted Brian as a man who loved nature. Each chapter represented a facet of Brian. Chapters were then organized to create a theme, ascension of who he was in relation to the world. As a reader, you enter with his love of learning, since University of Portland was where his tenure as Portland Magazine's editor began. Then we float through his life, his faith, his nature loving, his philosophy, story catching, his life as a friend and a father, and a transcendence, all towards a man in time rising towards a crescendo with the finale of life's meaning as illuminated through death in the final chapter, Stone Over Bone, through to the last essay, Table Talk. Curated essays were then placed within each chapter based on their own ascensions to create a successive flow within each section. Ultimately, my goal was that essay to essay, chapter to chapter, there was a transcendence of his words within this delicate balance of a whole collection. At this point, ideas for the book had been presented to the University of Portland, including the overall concept, the title, and the format. We were told that it was one of the most important projects the university had ever taken on. Karen and I met with Father Mark Porman, University of Portland president, Father Jerry Owinger, president for University Relations, Rachel Berry, head of marketing, and several of his editorial colleagues. With color swatches and paper samples and fonts and sample images in various formats, we spread out the assets of our imagination on this beautifully polished oblong wood table in the president's office conference room. They stood around looking at everything, and I just looked at Karen and let them take it all in, and it was a little bit of a nerve-wracking 10 minutes as we sat there while they looked at everything. After sharing context, ultimately they were happy with our direction and they offered feedback. I can't say enough about their team, Rachel, Amy, and Mark. They helped with careful copy editing and did a tremendous job of offering support throughout the whole project. Once the narrative structure was approved, the stage was set for the whole other creative universe to explore, the visual narrative of the collection. The initial book concept was to make each essay be its own sweet little dream. Each essay to stand alone and tell an editorial visual story within this dream. In other words, to be a smaller dream within a bigger dream. Graphically, to support this idea, I wanted to explore the mixed media approach with some pencil and some drawings and some watercolor. Karen put up a huge piece of butcher paper on the wall of her home in the living room, and we started to sort through the essay order and begin to put together the graphic puzzle. I'd go over to her house and we'd sit for hours as I read each essay out loud, one by one, and we discussed the visual story of each essay. We then go through libraries of thousands of photos to find visual expressions for what the words could look like. Some visuals became immediately known while others took weeks to figure out, but we were patient, and I can recall the emotional and creative labor it took for each page to be birthed. We commissioned an artist Karen knew, her name is Meg Harvey, to hand paint intentional watercolors and drawings because there were some specific essays we wanted to capture a particular emotion that a photo couldn't capture or convey. Day by day, week by week, the wall puzzle got visually enlivened. It was pretty exciting to imagine the full wall as an extent of an expansive dream. We spent time scrutinizing each page, ensuring every image, every subtle element was intentional, and we wanted to create an interaction with Brian's thoughts and his spirit. For example, the final inside page, we chose an otter image because Brian joked that he'd reincarnate as an otter. I wanted to add a bit of his charm and whimsy, and I think he would have gotten a kick out of it. For essay titles, I wanted to use a handwritten font, so as a gift from Brian, the essays would feel like letters, and I later learned that he handwrote a lot of his work. there were so many magical synchronicities that came up when we were talking about images and making decisions about what we wanted, that we later learned, oh yeah, Brian, you know, we heard these stories, so it was nothing but synchronicity. And I will say that Karen is my rock star in my creative world. She's the jelly to my peanut butter. The book is a work of art. It truly is a work of art. And we just found out that we were awarded a gold award for special publications in a category the University Association had given away for special publications. So we were very excited to hear that. We finished Sweet Dreams Story Catcher from thought to finish within a couple of months. We presented our final draft to the University of Portland team, and honestly, there was barely a dry eye in the room. Karen and I then had the opportunity to share it with Mary, Brian's wife, before anybody else outside of the university. And this was the day the book went to the printer. It was our first meeting. It was at Brian and Mary's house, and I was so nervous about what she would think. I already felt like I had known her. Now, back to that cold, wet, rainy April afternoon, only 11 months after Brian had passed away. We spent a few hours at their dining room table where they had shared so much life together. Page by page, Mary went through the printed proof of the book. Three of us laughed and cried as she started to fill in some of the blanks of these stories that Karen and I had only imagined as dreams. And we really wanted to take in this gift of that moment of sharing it with her. Between the professional stress of getting it right for the university, because it was such an important project, a personal pressure to carry forward a legacy, a gifted writer thousands had admired, and trusting my own creative instincts, perhaps sitting with Mary and Karen in Brian's house, surrounded by pictures of them at a table where beautiful memories had been shared, this culmination had been the most rewarding. Once she reached the last page, the three of us just sat there in silence looking at each other. And we wanted to hold the space. I think sometimes people just hurry up out of discomfort of these moments, but we were really with each other in that moment, and I wanted all of us to just take in what we had been through together. I could not hold back the warm stream of tears. And after a long, peaceful pause of receiving, she just looked at us and said, "It's perfect." So that's it for my portion. And thank you so much for being here. The Sweet Dreams Story Catcher selections were made by the people who will be reading them and who chose them. As I introduce you, if you don't mind just sharing a sentence or two about why you chose that particular essay, that would be awesome. I would really appreciate that. For our first reading, I'd like to warmly welcome Brian's wife, Mary, who has selected the first essay, Arriving.
Speaks for itself why I chose to write. I do want to thank you for everything. It was perfect. It is perfect, and it's lovely that all of you are able to enjoy it. So, all right. My daughter Lily is 3 weeks old today. She weighs 8 pounds. She weighs 8 pounds and is approximately the size of a salmon. To date, she is a contemplative child, much given to staring at lamplight and gazing meditatively out the window. She rather enjoys being naked, which worries her father, and she relishes being fed, being held close to the chest, and being tightly wrapped in blankets adorned with clouds. At night, she squeaks and hums for fear her parents will forget that she is there. During the day, she either sleeps like a rock or regards her father with unadulterated astonishment. Unromantic observers say that Lily's dark blue eyes are open wide to catch the reflected light from my spectacles. I prefer to think she is astounded that her father appears to be wearing a badge on his face. I stare at her with astonishment too, but my reasons are more complicated. I am amazed at the litany of miracles that compose her. Her tiny, efficient heart, her eyes like blue pools, her newly minted mind. I am amazed that a child so small can guzzle so much milk. I am amazed that a truck delivers 90 diapers a week to my door, and that I am so profoundly grateful for those diapers. But I am mostly amazed at Lily's sheer existence, her liliness, and I spend a good deal of time wondering where she came from. I know she came from my wife because I was there for the prison bit. I know she came from Boston because that ancient cobbled city is where my wife and I were living 10 months ago. But I don't actually really know where the breath that became Lily came from, although I have my suspicions. Myself, I come from the East. I was born in New York, but found my way eventually to New England, where I lived for many years. I lived in 4 towns and on 2 islands. I unloaded egg trucks, ran a tiny newspaper, and wrote for a large magazine. In July, I arrived in Oregon to succeed John Soyson as editor of this magazine. In October, my daughter arrived. We have arrived at a place of enormous beauty and promise, I tell my daughter. She opens her eyes wide at this, but says nothing. I suspect she's staring at magic.
I just love that piece. That piece had to go first. It said everything. It was beautiful. Thank you. And now, next is Shiloh Najalik, a longtime fan of Brian's work and a budding author in her own right. She is going to read in otter words.
Hello. Feel incredibly unqualified to be here. I chose in otter. I first discovered Brian with Mink River, and it was that book that you then buy a bunch of copies and you run around and you shove them on anybody you can come in contact with. You have to read this bird. This book, I said bird because I was thinking of Moses in the book, and every crow I've seen since then I call Moses. And since then, every January I read one of his books. But I broke that rule this year. I went to Marylhurst University and they announced that they were closing in the spring. And I was just getting out of a year's battle with illness, and I really needed some light. And I took off children, or wild animals, wild children. Thank you. I took it off my shelf and I read it in spring. I broke my January Brian Doyle read, and I came across In Otter Words, which just reminded me to look for wonder in really small places. So that's what I'm going to read. One day, I am sitting at my old desk reading young essays. These are essays sent to me by holy children of various sizes, and I can feel the joy sloshing and rising in me as their words pour in. And finally, I get topped off by the phrase, in otter words. A child has scrawled this in the brightest green ink you ever saw. In otter words, the holy parts are circled, she writes. And I think maybe my head is going to fly off, and what remains of my shaggy brain sprints away giggling and mooing with pleasure. You know how it's said that human beings are the only creatures who can contemplate 2 ideas at once? It's even better than that. We can entertain lots of joyous ideas at once, it turns out, such as, oh my God, otter words. That's enough right there for hours of happy speculation, am I right? I mean, what are the otter words for trout and rain and minnows and ice and fur that has been warmed by the sun to just the right sheen and shimmer? I bet there are otter words for that, and for clumsy fishermen, and for looming osprey, and for velvet mud of exactly the right consistency for sliding in, and for dying Chinook salmon like ancient riddled kings, and brilliant red drift boats, and cocky young mergansers, and huge brooding herons, and falcons falling like fists, and the basso murmur of mossy boulders grumbling at the bottom of the river, when the twiny, querulous voice of crawdads, and the speed-freak chitter of chickadees, and the fat feet of tiny kids, and the little pebbly houses that Katy flies live in, and the salmon flies like tiny orange helicopters, and the holy parts, which are circled, We knew that was true. The holy parts are underlined and illuminated and highlighted, aren't they? And circled with huge honking blessed magic marker as big as a beaver. Isn't that so? Sometimes I feel like the eyes in my heart sludge close quietly without me paying much attention. And I muddle and mutter along thinking I am savoring and celebrating, and then wham, a kid. It's always a kid. Says something so piercing and wild and funny and unusual that wham, my heart eyes fly open again like doors flung open by, say, an otter. And wham, I am completely and utterly overwhelmed and thrilled by the shocking, brilliant uniforms that falcons wear, and rendered speechless by the roiling summer seas of my wife's eyes. And I get the shivering willies hearing my dad's gentle, snortling laugh on the phone. And my God, have you ever seen a blue jay up close and personal? What a cheerful, arrogant criminal it is, all brass and swagger. Isn't that so? And most of all, best of all, better than every other joy and thrill, even the very best beer, which is a very excellent thing, are kids. Sure, they learn to lie, and sure, they are just not as into dental hygiene as you wish they were. And my God, they skin their knees 9 times a day and do things like smear peanut butter on their abraded knees just to see what it feels like, and shake flour on the dog, so that when he shakes off the flour at 1 million shimmers per minute, there will be a flour cloud in the kitchen the size of Utah. Isn't that cool, Dad? But more than anything else in the world, it is kids who make us see that the holy parts are circled. You know, and I know this is true, we forget. I think maybe we should write it down somewhere, like in magic marker on the wall by the stove, or in steamy words on the bathroom mirror. So we will see it every day and remember it, and be refreshed to the bottom of our bony bottoms. If necessary, use otter words. Thank you.
That was pretty good, and you got the name of that bird. All right, now I get to introduce one of my favorite former writing professors, Jay Ponteri. Not only is he a gifted author, he's about to launch the Creative Writing Master's Program at PNCA, which I'm starting in July, and he is Brian's friend. Jay will read What Matters.
Thank you, Janna. I wanted to, I think we should give Janna a hand for her awesome presentation. I chose, Brian's such a great sentence writer, and he was always an amazing reader of his work, and I always felt so coated with his love and his sense of wonder, clearly hard thought. Wonder always is. I chose What Matters because I think after encountering a year or more of my own experience of loss, it makes you come back into yourself and sort of find your edges again and figure out what is really important to you. That's one beautiful byproduct of grief, I think. What matters? I also just love lists. What matters? Hawks huddled disgruntled against hissing snow, wrens in winter thickets, swallows carving and swimming and slicing fat, grinning summer air, frozen dew outlining every single blade of grass, salmon berries, blackberries, thimbleberries, raspberries, cloudberries, snowberries, strawberries, blueberries, gooseberries. My children learning to read, the sinuous liquid flow of rivers and minks and cats, fresh bread with way too much butter. My children's hands when they cup my ancient grizzled face in their hands, exuberance and ebullience, tears of sorrow, which are the salt sea of the heart. Sleep in every form from doze to bone weary, the shivering ache of a saxophone and the yearning of an oboe. Folding laundry, hot from the dryer. That is a pleasure. Cobblers and tailors, a spotless kitchen floor, the way horses smell in spring, postcards on which the sender has written so much that he or she can barely squeeze in a signature, opera on the radio, toothbrushes, the postman's grin, the green, sifting, powdery snow of cedar pollen on my porch every year, the way a Huron labors through the sky with such vast elderly dignity, people who care about hubcaps, the cheerful ears of dogs, all photographs of every sort, tip jars, wine glasses, the way barbers sweep up circles of hair after haircuts, handkerchiefs, libraries, poems read aloud by older poets, fedoras, excellent knives, the very idea of albatrosses, the sorai, the tiny screws that hold spectacles together, book marginalia done with the lightest possible pencil, people who keep dead languages alive, wooden rulers, fresh mown lawns, first baseman's mitts, dish racks, the way my sons smell after their baths, the moons of Jupiter, especially Io, all manner of boats, the fact that our species produced Edmund Burke, naps of every size, junior policeman badges, walruses, cassocks and surplices, the orphan caps of long-lost pens, welcome mats and ice cream trucks, all manner of bees, cabbages and kings, the eulogy and elegy and puppetry, fingernail clippers, the rigging of sailing ships, ironing boards, hose and skice, the mysterious clips that girls wear in their hair. Sorry, I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation. Bodhisattvas and beauticians, porters and portmanteaus, canvas and canvas, bass and bluefish, furriers and farriers, trout and grout, peach pies of any size, the sprawling porches of old hotels and the old men who sprawl upon them, the snoring of children, the burble of owls, the sound of my daughter typing her papers for school in the other room, the sound of my sons wrangling and wrestling and howling and yowling, all sounds of whatever tone and tenor issuing from my children and all other forms of coupled pain and joy, which is to say everything alive, which is to say all prayers, which is what I am doing.
That was nice, Jay. Our next reader is Father Charlie Gordon, and he is going to read The Measure of Mystery. There we are.
The Measure of Mystery. My daughter and I are in the habit of reclining together in the gathering twilight, in her small room at the top of the stairs, in the last russet half hour before she closes up shop for the night. Once we are settled, coverlets and bears just so, there is the traditional paternal quiz. How was your day? Did you have fun? Where did you go? The traditional daughterly replies, fine, yes, out. And the now traditional paternal musing, there in the sifting dust of dusk, a about the utterly mysterious interior life of my oldest child. Once a fixed entity the size of a shoebox, and now a long-legged unpredictability, almost 6 years old. For some years now, the last voice in Lily's ear every night has been her father's baritone mutter, the guttural mumble of a man making his way through the published adventures of trolls, pigs, mice, otters, wolves, and ballerinas. Some months ago, we began a series of invented tales about foxes, a story cycle that stars a small gray fox, a Rosian Cinna argentius named Phil, who found his way into school one day and stayed, a furry phenomenon in the last row. At our fictional Fox Hollow school, there are quizzes every Friday morning, and lately it has been Friday morning every night, as Lily has become absorbed by tests, science tests, spelling tests, math tests. Perhaps what she loves is the sense of accomplishment that comes with correct answers to questions like, how do you spell door? Or name 3 foods that a bear eats. Or perhaps the startled pride in her father's gravelly compliment when his small student solves a conundrum like, what is 11 minus 9 plus 4? Or perhaps it is simply that she loves the challenge, loves to measure her mind against mystery. And lately, in that last lovely light, with that light, lovely head on my chest, I have been mesmerized by the mystery of her mind. How do you solve what's 11 minus 7? I asked her the other night. Easy, she said. 10, 1, 9, 2, 8, 3, 7, 4. So the answer is 4. I puzzled over this for a minute until I saw the pattern, the moving of stones from one pile to another, and then lay there silent, overcome with the gift that had been given to me, the chance to watch a new mind flowering, and a mind to boot that I had begged the Lord for ferociously, my fists hammering on his door night after night, until unto me there was born a daughter, a new note in the long song of the world, a story who will be told, I pray, long after I have myself become sifting dust at dusk. In the leap of her mind, there is a miracle so startling that I am but a stuttering student of it, a small boy peering between the blinds, a child struggling to sense the coherence in everything. And sometimes, just before nightfall, in a small room with a small girl, I do.
Thank you, that was lovely. And now, our finale piece for the evening, Table Talk, is the finale essay in the book. It's one of my favorites. It's going to be read by Kim Stafford, a friend of the Brian Doyle family.
In this piece, very disorienting, sweet sense of Brian's talking, Robert Louis Stevenson is talking, we're in Edinburgh, we're in Samoa. I really didn't feel like Brian was very far away as I read this. And I'm of course going to let him have the last word, even though he has Robert Louis Stevenson have the last word. But first I want to read this little poem I wrote for Brian called Bold Devotion. Begin your story with laughter, ringing for the minds of children inside their tent of wonder, after all are gathered near the fire for singing. Do the needful always, of true words built, a lilt you heard and shaped and spoke, like love made visible as honey, every tongue will savor singing. Of late I have been swimming happily in the many books of Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote hard, died young, and had the invalid's foresight to write his own epitaph. These famous lines, "Here he lies where he longed to be, home as the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter home from the hill," are chiseled in stone on a hill in Samoa. And they are, it seems to me, a bit of his own fascinating voice, now stone above bone. By all accounts, Lewis, as his family called him, was a remarkable talker very early on. One friend remembers first hearing his vibrating voice emerging from a dark corner in Edinburgh, and riveting ears for hours before the speaker revealed himself. And many who knew him insisted that his table talk was his prime genius. He was a close student of fine talk in others, a wonderful inventor of talk in his novels, and a man convinced to his dying day, which he ended talking to his wife, that talk is, quote, "the scene and instrument of friendship, the gauge of relations, the sport of life. There could be no fairer ambition than to excel in talk, to be affable, gay, ready, clear, and welcome." Pondering his lost voice, I consider the extraordinary role of talk in literature, culture, politics, religion, in short, in everything. How do we know of the past but by written talk? What would we know of Socrates, Mohammed, Samuel Johnson, but by their remnant voices? What do we really know of the itinerant Judean preacher Jesus Christ, after all, than in a bit of his puzzling talk? All great literature and history, and religion is both literature and history, quotes heavily from its characters. What easier and truer means is there to delineate personality and character than by what comes from the mouth? So plays are the ordered conversation of characters capering across the stage. And music, what the extraordinary singer and reluctant talker Van Morrison calls the inarticulate speech of the heart. And many novels are either long conversations or one mesmerizing voice. Joyce Carey's The Horse's Mouth, Samuel Beckett's Malloy, Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy. Perhaps part of the reason we so love to talk is that we learn it so early. It is our first means of communication and control, and we have an affection ever after for that which has propelled us into the wide world. Think of the sea of conversation in which children are bathed before they themselves begin to talk. It is an incomprehensible muddle of sound, but once the code is cracked, it is the means by which the world opens like a flower. Fluid, tentative, continually in further search, as Stevenson said. Even talk with a bite, as it were, is often stimulating and beneficial. There is the argument that clears the air, the short, sharp speech after much provocation that in an instant empties a kettle of rage. The vulgar poetry of oaths, the sharp words that are sometimes perfect blades in slicing away fatuity. The voice that begins as cries and whispers, moans and burbles, grows to maturity as the utterance of our innermost soul and does not die easily. It works furiously to persist past death, forcing itself into the future in books, wills, plays, recordings, letters, memoirs, epitaphs. It is our faithful companion, our most treasured possession, the last thing we clutch as we go ungentle into the night, the last flare of ourselves and souls. Thus our fascination with last words, and our powerful wish that a life might be distilled into a perfect poem spoken as the curtain falls, or spoken in stone over bone, as over the cheerful and energetic Stevenson, now silent after a life of rich and funny talk, which is, as he said, quote, our chief business in this world, a thing to relish with all our energy, while yet we have it, and to be grateful forever.
Thank you so much for being here. It's meant a lot to us. And again, there are a few books left at the University Bookstore, I believe, and there will be a version of it online. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming.